Hello, everybody. Welcome back for another episode of the Bullshit Buddies with Chad and Jeffrey. This week, we are shooting from Scotland.
Oi, yeah.
Is that a Scottish accent?
I don't know. It's British, I think. Oh, shit. Speaking of Scotland and, Ireland, are you going to watch the Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather fight?
Yeah. Oh, fuck yeah.
You want to,
you see that shit-talking session, dude?
Oh, I saw all of them.
Beautiful.
Saw Toronto, London.
Beautiful.
So good, yeah.
Oh,
I'm so happy I'm on vacation when that happened. When that's happening.
You're lucky as fuck. I might not be able to watch it live, but I will see that shit.
Yeah.
Anyways, coming to you live from Scotland, and this week we're going to be talking about a publication that Jeff actually brought to my attention. It's called Roots, or The Roots, right?
The Root.
The Roots.
Roots was a movie in the 80s or early 90s.
Anyways, it's a new site to me, but it definitely encompasses a much broader theme of kind of the race narrative, race baiting, trying to tie everything back to race. This is a black publication, focuses mainly on black issues, mainly black writers, and can't just kind of be like black people just talking about things. Needs to be black people talking about race. And I think one of the most minute examples of this would be their article on a black person's guide to Game of Thrones, which
Now,
see here was actually Michael Harriot was the one who published this under Culture. And I'll skip down a little bit past his intro where he talks.
Before you read it, though, I just want to make it clear. You have an article you're going to read. I have an article I'm going to read, but we have no idea. Like, I have not read the article you want to read, and you haven't read the one I wanted to. So this is going to be some pretty off the cuff.
Idea how this conversation is going to go.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, from what I've heard, yours is a bit more serious than mine.
Well, I like the fact that you went straight for, like, I know that it kind of sounds like, I don't know what the words are, but I know, like, your brief description, it kind of sounds just funny.
It is. It's kind of fucking hilarious, and that's what I was getting at, is the minute level to which people will boil things down to a race issue and try to see everything through the lens of race politics in the United States and globally. Apparently applies to Game of Thrones. So I'll skip past Michael's introduction where he talks a little bit about how he's astounded that people don't watch Game of Thrones because he's such a devout fan, essentially. But this is how he actually sees it. Going into the section, what is Game of Thrones about? The show is about white-on-white violence. The show is a turf war between different gangs who want to win the ultimate prize, the Iron Throne. And those of you, and you know that if there's one thing that, and this is a new word for me, actually. I got introduced to this through Root, which was very recent. WYPIPO. White people.
What?
White people, dude.
White people?
White people. Yeah. White people. I'm not fucking kidding you. This is how they refer to white people. They made up their own goddamn little word, I guess, which is kind of some amalgamation of internet slang and ebonics or something.
Wait, how is that not racist in itself?
Right. No.
Because remember, like, the controversy over Dumbo?
They're making that's the definition of, like, of racist slandering of people, is to make up a term to apply to huge fucking swaths of people.
It's like, yo, you see those white people over there?
No, talking about white people problems and you know, white people. They also have other articles that are talking about, you know, what was the most ridiculous white people antic that was pulled this week, and it's just it's a broad slandering term. Anyways, and you know that if there's one thing that white people love more than territory, it's thrones.
Big fan of the toilet.
Next category, but aren't there superpowers, dragons, monsters, and shit? Yes, but the supernatural elements in the show are used as analogies and metaphors. And again, I'm not fucking joking. So what do the dragons stand for? White privilege. Dragons stand for white privilege. And the monsters? White people.
So I'm just gonna say, I know. In the couple podcasts ago, we were gonna say we would never start a Twitter account we're starting a Twitter account and we're putting this video on the Roots comment section.
I can actually agree to that.
Yeah, let's do this. Because white
It's
people.
for the greater good. Really.
Yeah, because as white people.
As white people,
we need to have our voices heard.
So far we've established that Game of Thrones is not about, a fantasy power play between fantasy nations with superpowers. It's actually about white on white violence, because everybody knows that white people like territory and thrones.
Chad.
Right? They want power.
White people.
And white people, excuse me. We've established that the dragons are a manifestation of white privilege. We've established that the monsters in the show are also white people or white people. Next question. What about the actual white people on the show? Oh, they're also metaphors for Caucasians.
How's that a metaphor?
That was what occurred to me first too, reading that. So what about the Asian people on the show? Well, they're metaphors for Asians.
Huh. No, they're
Asians.
They're
actually Asians.
Superliminal description, like representations of Asians, because they're fucking Asians. What do you call, like, if you did white people with white people? What would you call Asia people? Oh, I guess Asia people.
A's people.
Ass people.
What?
Ass people.
Ass people.
As people.
I'll ask your people. Anyways, next question. Wait, is everything about white people? Exactly. But Game of Thrones teaches us that not all white people are the same. That's very progressive of him to say.
Well, thank you for that.
It's interesting that he had to learn that lesson from Game of Thrones.
What was the author's name again?
Michael something. I'm not scrolling.
Well, Michael, thank you for acknowledging that not all white people are the same. We really appreciate that.
Well, some of them are monsters, and
some of them are monsters, and some of them are assholes.
Some of them
we're not all the same.
Some of them get their privilege from dragons.
Yeah.
Actually, but Game of Thrones teaches us that not all white people are the same. That's what I'm trying to show you. If you'd stop being so racist. Let's see. Me? How am I being? Okay. So are there any black people in the show? And this is hilarious to somebody who's actually read the books. Yes, there's a group of castrated warriors who were once slaves called the Unsullied. And as anybody who's read the books know, the Unsullied are not drawn particularly from one location. They're Unsullied soldiers of all races and religions and creeds and ethnicities and cultures, and the slave owners actually don't give much of a fuck about going to metaphorical Africa and just enslaving the black people, but that's what Michael's decided is apparently characteristic. Have you seen the show?
Yeah.
I mean, the most characteristic Unsullied is Grey Worm, and he's definitely not white, but he doesn't exactly look black either. I don't know what the fuck.
Well, here's the thing, though. Like,
I'm assuming that Michael's only ever watched the show.
The Unsullied are all eunuchs, right?
Yeah.
Like, so wouldn't that be, to use a metaphor, as the British say, the metaphor, as they say in Scotland, in its actual context, wouldn't the importance of them being eunuchs be any group of people who have been disenfranchised?
Yeah.
Yeah. So not just black people, but Irish people.
We need to come up with more people words.
All people. All people who've been disenfranchised are
all people.
slaves.
Yeah. Next question. What? Let me guess. They were freed by ... White people. Yes. A blonde lady named Daenerys, who's impervious to fire, was born with the ability to ride dragons and gifted at birth with dragon eggs that would eventually hatch. Daenerys rode the dragons, in parentheses, or her privilege, to save the slaves. And of course, after she frees them from their lives dedicated to fighting in wars for their masters, she decides to spend their lives fighting for her, the quote-unquote queen, and help her ride her privileged dragons all the way to the Iron Throne. Next question. So, they've dedicated themselves to their white savior woman because she saved their people's masculinity. Oh, this is getting kind of interesting, but the show is about politics, white people, and privilege. Is there someone like Donald Trump? Yes, they are the Lannisters, the symbol of white privilege. Everyone thinks they're rich, but really they don't have any money. However, no one in the Seven Kingdoms has seen their tax returns. They exist mostly by colluding with forces outside of Westeros to keep their power by any means necessary. And again, god fucking damn it, this guy needs to read the goddamn books before he starts. I'm
Yeah.
I'm being a Song of Ice and Fire elitist here right now, but no, the Lannisters. No.
Wait, while you do that, I'm very gently gonna hum the Game of Thrones theme song behind your rhetoric. Keep going.
Who are the Starks? The Starks are a family who chilled in their own segregated neighborhood, not bothering anybody. Ned was the father and had 5 kids. So I'd like you to also note that he's essentially, although the Starks are essentially Northmen and probably some of the whitest motherfuckers in the show, he's claiming them as black people.
Well,
Black
not
people?
only like geographically where they
Black
came
people?
from is probably more akin to Scandinavia or, Europe, parts of Europe.
That's what I mean. He's happy to say the Insulated are black people because they're downtrodden,
Right.
even though they're not actually exclusively black. But the Starks, because they're main characters and oppressed in the show, are black, even though they're the whitest motherfuckers in the show, about as white as
Specifically portrayed as the whitest motherfuckers in the show too. With last names like Snow.
Ned was the father, and he had 5 kids. He was also raising his nephew Jon Snow. In parentheses, his sister got knocked up by this crazy guy, and you know how we do.
How do we do?
I don't fucking know, dude. Anyways, Ned let his homeboy convince him to take this quote-unquote good job, let his daughter marry a white boy, and moved his family into a white neighborhood. That was when they moved to the Lannister den. So again, he's claiming that the Starks represent black people because the Starks are the good guys of the show.
I'm sorry,
Anyways,
I'm losing this narrative here. So the eunuchs are slaves of black descent.
They're not actually black people, but they are black people because they are enslaved. Yes, that's how Michael views it. And the Starks, who are white and who live in isolated white neighborhoods, who are actually white but represent black people who are actually live in segregated, even though they're isolationist because they don't want anything to do with the people who live below them, are the black people because he views their isolation by choice as segregation by force.
I think my brain
is
just
melting,
exploded.
dude. This is your brain on fucking progressivism right now. This is what happens. Folks.
Progressivism, actually, but yeah. Good God.
That what they would call it progressivism. Right. We agree. It means more or less the same thing. Anyways, and the Lannisters / Trumps cut off his head because Ned knew about the Russian collusion. I don't even fucking know. Damn, I got this. Now tell me more about the monsters. And Michael says, the White Walkers. And you see where this is going. Is that your nickname for them? Nah, bruh. They're really called the White Walkers. They're blue-eyed white devils who kill and destroy everything in their path. I know that's a little on the nose, but this is actually what's happening in the show. And the only thing that might be able to stop them is ... And then the question is, let me guess, our cousins. Our cousins. They're claiming the Starks as our cousins.
But wait.
And Michael comes back. No, I'm not even fucking.
Wait, no, not just a quick aside though. Aren't the White Walkers from the same area as the Starks?
They are.
Yeah.
And actually, I mean, at least in terms of
they're closer to the wall than the.
Well, okay, so the show also fucks up. They kind of consider everything to be the Army of the Dead or the White Walkers, but the others are the. Have you watched the show?
I haven't watched it since I think season 4.
Okay, but you know the. Actually, I don't even know if they got to that in season 4. But there's the. Funnily enough, actually, to call them the White Walkers because what they kind of refer to as the White Walkers are mythical, immortal, much more human-looking creatures.
Zombies,
well, no, and that's the thing is they basically enslave dead people into fighting for their undead army, and they don't really make that distinction very well in the show. But the actual mythical creatures are called the others, and then the whites are the undead, who can be of any race, who are also enslaved. Although in the books and the show, most of the people who are being forced to fight for the undead army are white people, again, because of geography of how Westeros works. Anyways, so it was our cousins. He's claiming the Starks as our cousins because they represent black people, because apparently all black people are related. So the cousins stop them. He says, exactly. Even though the Stark kids have been split up ever since their father died, they've all faced rough life that makes them tough as hell. Plus, they've quietly acquired superpowers that no one can know about. And all the Starks can fight like a motherfucker. Even the youngest girl, whose superpower is that she can blend in with white people. You haven't seen the show, but Arya Stark cuts the faces off of dead people and through magic basically is able to take over their appearance. She's also white, though.
Oh, is that with the House of the Dead thing that she ends up at? That's where I stopped.
Really pasty. House of Black and White.
Yeah, House of Black and White. Is that where she learns how to do that? Okay.
Yeah. That's what they do. They're called the Faceless.
Spoilers,
They're
man.
called the Faceless, man. I know. I'm ruined.
Because
It's your own goddamn fault.
Well,
if you're on season 4, we're on season 7.
I was planning on continuing it, like it just, I needed a fucking break.
I'm not pausing from the spoiler alerts just because you can't be bothered to keep up on shit. Anyway, so her superpower is that she's able to blend in with white people.
So she put on whiteface.
Now all our Stark cousins are trying to get back to the old neighborhood for the family reunion so they can stop the White Walkers from taking over.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I can repeat it. It's not.
There's
it's not going to make any more sense.
I think there's blood in my ears right now. There's a constant ringing.
Oh my god. And there are some other groups who can help. The Queen of White Privilege is headed over with her ballless army, and our nephew, black people's nephew, the white guy Jon Snow, has convinced the poor white rednecks, or the wildlings, to fight with him and the Starks. Plus, the whole hood is on our side, because they know Ned has always kept it 100. Don't know what the fuck that means. Until the police, the Kingsguard, executed him.
This is why we need to start doing video on these podcasts, because obviously nobody can see it, but I'm literally like in the thinking man position, just trying to sort this out in my head.
Jeff looks like he's having a midlife crisis, and, if I had to guess what I look like in a mirror right now, it would be
comical.
Yeah, dude, this is absurd.
Did you read this article all the way through?
Nah, I skimmed it, but
okay.
God damn, the article wraps. Well, I'm convinced. I'm already hooked on Game of Thrones, and I haven't even watched an episode. But will it actually teach me about politics and life? And Michael says, I have no idea, but when Donald Trump announced his run for president, I told people the same thing our Stark cousins have been telling people in Game of Thrones. Stark fucking cousins bothers the fuck out of me. Has been telling people on Game of Thrones about the White Walkers ever since the first episode, and no one would listen to them. Winter is coming. It was by Michael Harriot, a staff writer at The Root, host of The Black One podcast, and editor-in-chief of the digital daily magazine Niggas Who Read.
I'm
fucking speechless right now, dude.
Know what to say.
Holy shit, man. And this is kind of what I'm getting at, is just like when you put everything in this context of this extreme race narrative, and that's how you see the world, everything, even a fucking fantasy TV show, needs to get bent into this crazy ass fucking lens of some kind of race politics. And I actually heard this on NPR not too long ago. They were talking about, and this is not having to do with race, but they were talking about people with disabilities and how they view the Game of Thrones show, and how, focus on Tyrion as a dwarf is offensive, and focus on soldiers who have been maimed, and a lot of it was on Bran, because Bran essentially is stuck in he's basically paralyzed. He can't use his legs, and they were talking about how the whole thing is he wants to be able to be a warg so he can be able to move still and not be stuck to his metaphorical wheelchair.
I stopped. You
can impersonate animals.
Oh, okay.
So like one of the famous lines that the I'm trying not to use terminology, but one of the main warg guys refers to him when Bran asks, like, will I be able to walk again? He says, no, you'll never be able to walk again, but you'll be able to fly. because you can impersonate.
Oh, those
you
was
can
that
impersonate
with the eagles and everything. Like, was that something to do?
kind
with...
of. I'm not sure what you've seen, but
Well, didn't Bran always have dreams of
my main
eagles?
point was that the NPR article broadcast was, featured people who were horribly upset by this because, well, why should people who are in wheelchairs want to be able to alleviate that condition and all? And it's like, dude, if you could ask a motherfucker in a wheelchair, like, hey, would you rather just walk? I'm pretty sure they'd say yes. And they're saying, well, this is perpetuating unrealistic expectations of what disabled people should be able to expect from their condition. And it's like, it's a fantasy. It's it's literally, its genre is fantasy.
Yeah.
And you can say that same thing about, I don't know, about sci-fi stuff. Some guy gets his leg blown off, and the next scene that you see him, and he's got a bionic leg going on. It's like, would you rather see him in a wheelchair? Would he rather be in a wheelchair? Would rather have a badass bionic leg? Of course he would. The whole point is you're talking about things that don't exist.
I got to.
It's mind numbing, and I also got to piss.
Yeah, I got to take a piss and think about this shit.
Jeff and I are just getting back from a urination break here, and kind of just trying to come to terms with life and the planet that we live on. And I think it was Calvin and Hobbes, and stop the planet, I want to get off.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
I mean, it's my bad. I mean, I get this guy probably, hopefully represents some kind of fringe view, but kind of fitting into the broader topic of what we had hoped to talk about today is, and you see this everywhere, if you choose to really strongly identify with any kind of political ideology, everything that you see needs to be crushed and conformed to fit the narrative. And where most people just look at a interesting, very violent, very titty showing television show, this guy sees evidence of white privilege. He sees oppression of minorities. He sees, and it's the same thing with I mean, feminists are notorious. Everything is the patriarchy.
Right.
It doesn't matter if it benefits women, it's the patriarchy. If it's bad to women, it's the patriarchy. If it's bad to men, it's the patriarchy. Everything comes down to it, and this the same thing with this guy. He just, every single thing about Game of Thrones, he wants to tie back to a race narrative.
Well, I mean, there's definitely like interpretations of literature and film, and I'll go back to a recent point that I made that my interpretation, I guess, of the slaves being eunuchs would be that, of course, a disenfranchised people who have been stripped of every ounce of their being would be very representative of what happened to slaves, right? And that's something that is not literal in the book. They don't go in to say that, but it is something that you can derive from the context. But how the fuck he got all this from?
Well, to take your point, there's value in the social or political commentary that comes, even if it's not explicitly stated, from literature. I mean, Animal Farm, right? Obviously talking about communism.
Well, very specific,
right? But
yeah,
he never necessarily referred to it as, and these are the communistic red devils, right? You just kind of were able to pick up that was what he was talking about.
That was Stalin. That was.
But I mean, you just see the level of dissociation that the Starks are the good guys,
right?
The Starks have bad shit happen to them, therefore they're the black people in the show. The Unsullied eunuchs are enslaved and also have bad things happen to them. Therefore, they must be black people, even though in actual practice, they come from a shit ton of different backgrounds. It's basically anybody who's ever been unfortunate enough to find themselves a slave in Slaver's Bay. Geographically, the equivalents seem to be a lot closer to the Middle East than... And there's a lot of reference of them enslaving their own people, too. The people who make the Unsullied, who chop the dicks off those guys and force them to kill puppies and train for 14 hours a day, are doing that shit to their own people. So, I mean, if you want to say that they're black, you have to be consistent in your metaphor and say that it's black people who are doing this to black people. But no, because that would, that kind of logical consistency doesn't fit into his worldview. So therefore, the people that he sees as black who are doing things to other people that are bad must be white, because only white people do bad things. That's the crazy ass fucking level of mental contortion that he's had to display.
The thing too is, when you read Game of Thrones, I've read the first
Song of Ice and Fire, actually.
Okay, whatever. When you read the Song of Ice and Fire, I've read the first 3 books, and I've got through the 4th, like more than half of the 4th one. And I was like, I need a break. This is consuming too much of my life. There's no good bad. And George R. R. Martin's been very clear about that. But it was one of the things when I was reading the books, I didn't hear him say this, was that there's good elements and bad elements of absolutely every human.
Yeah.
And then he exactly said those words. So for him to pit, these are the good guys, these are the bad guys, and this is white privilege, is completely against, like, I don't want to say against, but it's completely counter of what George R. R. Martin said about his own work. Is that he doesn't write about, he writes about people, not about good versus evil.
It's not the Lord of the Rings model where you have the evil guys dwelling around the fucking active volcano with the crazy ass eye peeping out everyone, and you got the hordes of evil orcs coming down to fight the shining knights in armor. It's a lot more fucking complicated than that.
Yeah.
And every single faction of the show has its good characters and has its bad characters, and every he was cascading the Lannisters as being the representative of the Republicans. Like, what does that make Tyrion?
Yeah, that's
Tyrion's
what I was
a
going to say.
Lannister. He's one of the most loved characters in both the show and the books. Anytime that I ever end up with I'm reading the books and I turn the page and it says Tyrion's going to be the perspective of the next chapter, I'm like, oh yes.
Yeah, no, Tyrion's
fucking awesome, right?
Yeah,
and that, but he wants to try to kind of cram Tyrion as a Lannister into the Republican / Trump metaphor that he sees. It's absolutely insane.
Well, that's the thing. Like, it's as convoluted as his interpretation of this work was. I guess we should call the Holy Script. It's also way too simplistic.
Well, it has to be.
There's no thought here.
No.
There's none. There's just
alternatingly, he's able to call the Unsullied, slaves and oppressed, even though they're oppressed by their own people, because he sees oppression as something that black people face. But he generally sees the Starks as good, even though they come from the whitest area, but they're also oppressed. Therefore, they're black people, and he refers to them as literally his family members.
Well, also just too, like, okay, so
way simplistic, way convoluted.
The Unsullied. Now, this again, I think this was in the 3rd book, where the Daenerys Targaryen, riding her dragons of white privilege, freed the slaves. Is that not correct?
Yeah.
And also destroyed the slave holders and basically wrecked the town.
She actually she crucified them.
So where does that fit into this guy's interpretation?
He kind of mentioned it actually, that it's a narrative that, for their empowerment and their freedom, black people need to look to white people.
Oh, okay. I must have missed that part when I was just.
And then they start loyally serving the Queen of White Privilege, who rides around on her white privilege dragons.
Okay. Okay.
But I mean, in his,
of course it's that. Yeah, of course it's that. Of course it's not a group of people who are appreciative of not, like, hey, we're not slaves anymore. And wasn't there a huge point in the book where, like, you will, if you want to, you can freely follow me as free men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, they start referring to them, and she's actually really prickly in the books for quite a while. That she manages to adopt like a few advisors from that culture and interacts with people from that culture, and they keep referring to the Unsullied as slaves, and she gets pissed every time about it. And it's just like, they're fucking free, like they're following me because they're free, because they wanted to. Yeah, I mean. But again, that doesn't conform to the narrative, right? His narrative is that, if black people are following a white person who's done something good for them, even though all of the black people that he's trying to metaphorize are not actually black people.
Yeah,
and therefore, it must be some example of, I don't know, subservience or something. I don't get it,
is
dude.
Freely, like, following somebody's subservience? I don't think so. I mean, we all have leaders in our daily lives. I mean, we call them bosses and CEOs and shit.
Well, just as a thought experiment. I mean, it's mentioned in the book that not only the Unsullied are not a racial monolith, right? They're slaves from all over the place. They mainly seem to be not recruited. They mainly seem to be enslaved by their own people. So it's like Astapori people enslaving other Astapori people. So if you want to call the Unsullied black because most of them are Astapori, then they're also being enslaved and abused mostly by black people. if that's the weird fucking metaphor that you want to get. But let's say Grey Worm wasn't a person of color; he was white. Let's say most of the Unsullied were white. Let's say Daenerys was a person of color and freed them.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you would look at that as like, well, they've had horrible enslaved lives for a couple of decades, and somebody who comes along who wants to free them and do them an enormous good and treat them like human beings for the first time in a long time, you're gonna want to follow that person regardless.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
Well, it's always a very valuable thought experiment to just, on matters of where you believe race to be. I mean, obviously with this guy, race to be an issue. You switch to races and see what conclusion you come to.
Right.
Let's talk about Islam for a second. Imagine Islam as a white religion who told women that they must wear something and also cut their clits off. Would anybody ever be okay with that? Absolutely not.
Nope.
But because it is perceived as a religion of the oppressed minority, it's fine. So the author of this article is Monique Judge. I find ironic. And the title is Attorney. Justin Damon is the most innocent victim of a police shooting he has ever seen. Okay. Those who want to Those who want to blame every single black person who has ever been shot by police for their own death have finally gotten their perfect victim. A white woman named Justin Damon, a lawyer. This is fucking written.
Is she trans?
Justine. I'm sorry. Was there a typo earlier? Justine. Sorry. Justine. A white woman named Justine Damon, a lawyer representing the family of the Australian. This is written like fucking dog shit, first off.
Yeah, you heard the other one, right?
Yeah. Excuse me. So, Justine Damon was the woman that was shot. A lawyer who was representing the family of the Australian native who was shot and killed by a Minneapolis police officer said Thursday that Damon is the most innocent victim of a police shooting that he has ever seen. Robert Bennett is the attorney who was hired by Damon's family earlier this week, and he told the Minnesota Star Tribune that the family is seeking justice for Damon, 40, who was killed by Minneapolis police officer Mohammed Noor Saturday after she called 911 to report a possible sexual assault.
911.
Yeah. She called 911. Same thing. It's quite early, and this is in quotes, it's quite early and improper use of deadly force on someone who is impossible for me to conceive of as Jesus Christ. Of someone who is impossible for me to conceive of as a threat to anyone. Bennett told the Star Tribune on Thursday. I mean, she saved ducklings out of the sewer, for God's sakes. Okay. I would say the lawyer has, like, okay, what's that fucking have to do with absolutely anything? Bennett is not unfamiliar with cases involving police misconduct. He worked with the family of Philando Castile in getting a settlement over his shooting death. God. Jesus.
I don't know, it's funny sometimes when I read, especially when I'm being recorded and I'm pointing out ridiculous shit, that I'm like, am I just speaking stupid right now?
I know we've been drinking. Yeah, so obviously it's some of that.
I know you're like worried that you're just talking like an idiot, and then you reread what you're reading and you're like, no, they're talking like a fucking idiot.
I'm gonna do some grammar corrections immediately as I read. So if this becomes more coherent, guys, it's all me. Over his shooting and death. Sorry, I lost my place. Oh, in Falcon Heights, Minnesota last year by former St. Anthony police officer Geronimo Yanez. And he represented Frank Baker, who was bitten by a police dog and kicked by a St. Paul, Minneapolis police officer last year. I'm assuming, again, this is the lawyer talking. I'm not saying Philando wasn't innocent, too, or that Frank Baker wasn't innocent. But here is someone who called the police and was trying to stop someone from being hurt and ends up being shot in her pajamas. While Bennett may very well have had the best intentions at heart, the meaning of his words is there if you read between the lines. Damon's shooting was unfortunate and tragic, and her family deserves justice. But let's be clear, the biggest difference between her and other innocent victims of police shootings is that she was a white woman. Okay, let's just pause there for a second. So you're talking about a lawyer.
I haven't heard of her.
I haven't
heard of her. I've heard of Castile.
Yep.
I've heard of Brown. I've heard of actually a lot of quote unquote innocent parentheses later proven to be guilty and totally justified in being shot black men before.
Yeah.
I've never heard of her. This is the first time that I've heard that name.
Well, we're also talking about a lawyer who has defended black people and is now defending a white person. And the crux of the article is he's racist for defending a white woman. The fuck, dude?
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're saying is the issue the crime of being shot in unjustified circumstances, or is the real issue black people getting shot?
Well, I guess the thing they're drawing issue with is the fact that they said she is the most innocent victim I've ever seen. Okay, well, you're talking about a person who called the police herself, not who was approached by the police, not who was pulled over, whatever. Called the police to report a possible sexual assault, and she was shot and killed. If that is not the very definition of the most innocent victim, white or black, I actually don't understand what her race has to do with this. If a black woman was to call for the same thing and be shot by a police officer, she would be the most innocent victim I have ever fucking heard of.
Well, yeah, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, but a lot of times when they want to align these people with being innocent or being unarmed, and then when you look at the details of the case, it's like, well, yeah, was Michael Brown unarmed? Kind of. Did he also make serious attempts to assault a police officer and take his gun? Also, yes. Did he assault a convenience store owner to steal property from them? Also, yes. I mean, I know you and I just got into a spat over the Castile case where did the officer tell him or not tell him to stop reaching for something when he stated that he had a gun? Yes. Yeah, so I mean, if you have a guy who didn't do any of that, or chick in this case who didn't do any of that shit but still got shot, kind of does seem like she's one of the more innocent examples.
Yeah, and I also think Philando, I mean, you can't see what happened in the car or what the cops saw, but from my evaluation of the video, Philando was innocent. Like, it seemed like the cop overreacted and acted too quickly to me. So if you watch the Black Lives Matter podcast that we did, that's very clear. Right? Me and Chad got into it a little bit over that, but it's still incredibly different. And let's say that Justine Damond was black. If she did the exact same thing, I would say that is the most innocent victim I've ever heard of. Obviously, like.
Well, but again, my kind of main point is that I've heard a lot of names of supposedly innocent people who have been shot by police. A lot of them turned out not to be innocent, and all of them were black. And the reason that I know those names is because they were blown the fuck up in media. Right.
But nobody's heard of
I
Justin
haven't heard
Damond,
Justine's name. The first place that I heard it was a black news organization.
I would say Black Power, Black Supremacist News Organization by our.
I'll take your modifiers.
Respect the pronouns.
Saying that this is a heinous case, and I kind of have to wonder if they feel the same about Michael Brown.
Well, what's with this fucking race baiting bullshit? I mean, this is a thing. Like when we were talking about Game of Thrones, and it was the who was the guy with the cat? The comic. I don't want to
Cat?
yeah, or the big Hobbs and something. Get off this planet.
Calvin and Hobbes.
Yeah, like I'll stop the planet. I want to get off.
You for forgetting that, dude.
Stop the planet. I want to get off. That's the only thing. Like, that's the only thing I can think about. Like, how fucking ridiculous is this? That we're sitting here debating the race over a dead woman. It wouldn't matter what color she is. It doesn't. She's dead. And the root is using this. The root is standing on the corpse of this person and the corpses of every other person who they reference for profit.
Yeah, actually, when you put it that way.
Yeah, I actually think that is where I want to stop this because that's fucking ridiculous.
Well, folks, it's been another interesting, somewhat tangential episode of the Bullshit Buddies. Thank you for listening in, and go read the root for yourself.
If you want to question your sanity, read the root
at your peril.
Yeah. But hey, we had a couple laughs, and then we got super serious. But people at the root, go fuck yourselves.